news daily. That's what we do. The first one article is about how a Belgian guy shaped India's national science movement. So, how did science become cool in India? I always wonder how there were there IITs and Indian Institute of Sciences, and Indian ISRO, all of those, right in the first 10 years of Indian independence, where only 13% of Indians were literate, right? And how were all of those things happening? Who was pushing for scientific thought in India? How was Indian statistics is also something that's talked about a lot. Okay, how Indian statistics us time pe were one of the best statistics. Indian census also happened in that first decade of independence. So how were these things happening in a relatively illiterate newborn country like India? So we'll read about that. Second article we'll read is 5 landmarks of Bihar politics. I'm super fascinated by Bihar politics. So what happened in Bihar? We are going to read about that and try to understand. And because Bihar elections are also coming, so it's very important for us to understand how Bihar votes, or how Bihar has voted historically. What are the factors that have gone into it? So that will be very, very interesting to know. And the third article which we'll read is I'm very, very fascinated by aviation. So this is a Caravan article, a 4-year-old article, lessons from India's long journey to gaining the right to fly. So kaise India went into the air, and India's right to fly. So those are the 3 articles that we'll read. Let's start with the first one. This is written by Rohan Basu for Indian Express. It's titled The Forgotten Belgian Jesuit Priest. I hope all of you are already here. Just very quickly, let me just pull my feed as well so that I can see all one of you, right? Then at least I will have one viewer, which will be great. Very quickly, let me check.
0.
All right, now there'll be one viewer. That is me, guys. Let's go. Okay, the first article that we'll read is The Forgotten Belgian Jesuit Priest Who Shaped India's National Science Movement. Thomas Babington Macauley's notorious dismissal of Indian knowledge systems in 1835, declaring that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia, continues to dominate our understanding of colonial education. Right? Colonial education में वो लोग ने बोला था कि Indian, who is Thomas Babington Macaulay, by the way? It's very important to know that he is the one who is the father of modern Indian education, or colonial Indian education. He also said कि हमें brown लोग चाहिए जिनके thoughts English हो, जिनका culture English हो, जो कपड़े English पहने, right? And he saw no merit in what Indian culture or Indian history or Indian traditional knowledge systems have to offer. He thought that Britishers and Europeans are way more advanced than, as he says, in as compared to India and Arabia. And it still continues to dominate our understanding of colonial education. Whenever I think of colonial education, I think of Macaulay. Everybody thinks of Macaulay. अभी भी political jibes होते हैं, ये Macaulay की औलाद हैं. When you have to say something to somebody who pretends to be or tries to be too English, or tries to think of I don't know, liberal values, or English values, coat and tie values. So then this is used as a slang also in politics, right, by a lot of people. The prevailing narrative is simple. The British imposed their knowledge systems on India, uprooting indigenous traditions and creating a class of Indians who were, quoting Macaulay, English in tastes, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. Creating a class of Indians. Let's create a class of Indians. So क्योंकि वो लोग इंडिया को गवर्न कर रहे थे, तो उनको इंडियन ऑफिसर्स चाहिए, उनको इंडियन आर्मी में लोग चाहिए, उनको इंडियन डॉक्टर्स चाहिए, उनको इंडियन ट्रेडर्स चाहिए. तो अब इंडिया को रूल करना है, तो उनका आइडिया ये था कि हम लोग एक क्लास ऑफ इंडियंस बनाएंगे जो इंग्लिश बोलेंगे, राइट? ऑल ऑफ आवर फ्रीडम फाइटर्स, I could say the educated ones, but many of them were hugely educated, came from that frame, were very, very educated. They could speak fluent English. So, but then they fought for independence and got independence. But still, there is a lot of British colonial hangover in our education still. And the author is right here in saying that, uprooting indigenous traditions. There were so many traditions in India, and they were all uprooted. And this happened for good or for bad, right? This story of colonial imposition versus Indian resistance has become so entrenched that we often miss the more complex reality of how modern science actually took root in 19th century India. Modern science India में root लिया 19th century में. ठीक है? What if I told you, says the author, that one of the most crucial figures in establishing India's national science movement was neither British nor Indian, but a Belgian Jesuit priest whose vision of scientific education aligned more closely with Indian aspirations for intellectual independence than with British colonial designs. That's very, very crazy to hear, right? His vision of scientific education aligned closely with Indian aspirations for intellectual independence than with British colonial designs. Britishers के लिए नहीं सोचना है, अपने हिसाब से अपना खुद का इंटेलेक्ट डेवलप करना है, a distinctly Indian intellect. What does that even mean? Eugene Lafont arrived in Calcutta in December 1865, not as a colonial administrator or a businessman seeking profit, but as a Catholic missionary with a deep commitment to scientific education. ठीक है, वो missionary था, he was spreading the gospel, but वो committed था scientific education पे, which is a very interesting thing. Deeply religious person who is committed to scientific education. Born in Belgium in 1837, Lafont had trained in experimental physics at Namur before joining the St. Xavier's College faculty in Calcutta. So St. Xavier's is that old, guys, right? Trained in experimental physics at Namur before joining the St. Xavier's College faculty in Calcutta. What followed was a remarkable 43-year career that would reshape scientific education in colonial India in ways that challenge our conventional understanding of how modern knowledge systems developed. Wow, let's read about it. When science met national aspirations. Now science has always been like closely tied to national aspirations. Whenever like a moon landing is done, it's like a national pride, right? Whenever a man is sent to space, it is like a national pride. Whenever a technology is developed, national pride. A weapon is developed, national pride. You know, missiles, so many things. So they have been going together with, you know, especially in the weaponry area for a long time. When science met national aspirations, the India that Lafont encountered was far from the passive recipient of Western knowledge that colonial narratives suggest, right? India was not a passive recipient of Western knowledge कि वो आएंगे गोरे civilization लाएंगे, गोरे हमें तारेंगे, you know, हमारा सारा कुछ, हमारी सारी problems को solve कर देंगे. ऐसा narrative लफोंट को तो नहीं मिला जब वो 1865 में कैलकटा आया. As early as 1823, Raja Ram Mohan Roy had written to Lord Amherst pleading for the government to employ European gentlemen of talents and education to instruct the natives of India in mathematics, natural philosophy, chemistry, anatomy and other useful sciences. ठीक है, राजा राम मोहन रॉय ने लिखा था गवर्नमेंट को, उस टाइम की गवर्नमेंट, ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट, द क्वींस गवर्नमेंट, कि भाई यूरोपियन जेंटलमैन को लाओ और हमें सिखाओ. क्या सिखाओ? मैथमेटिक्स, नेचुरल फिलॉसफी, केमिस्ट्री, एनाटमी एंड अदर यूजफुल साइंसेस. Roy understood something that modern critics of colonial education often overlook. Indians were not merely being subjected to Western knowledge, they were actively demanding it. Very interesting. Seeing science as the key to Europe's political and technological supremacy. Some of these Indians, which one of them is Raja Ram Mohan Roy, he understood that, you know, ठीक है थोप रहे हैं, पर it was not just थोपना, Indians were demanding it, right? Seeing science के यूरोप इतना बड़ा इसलिए हुआ, वो हम पढ़ते भी हैं कि इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन यूके में हुआ, स्टीम इंजन यूके में चला, तो वो उस कंट्री ने आधा वर्ल्ड यू नो अपने रूल किया. दैट स्मॉल लिटिल आइलैंड विच इज़ लाइक आई डोंट नो साइज ऑफ उत्तर प्रदेश, प्रॉब्ली लेस, यू नो. तो वो लोग इंडियंस को पता चला कि ये इसलिए हो रहा है क्योंकि उनकी टेक्नोलॉजी बेटर है, उनकी साइंस बेटर है, उनकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ द वर्ल्ड बेटर है, उनका नेविगेशन बेटर है. तो ये हमें सीखना चाहिए इफ़ वी वांट टू यू नो गो अहेड in terms of like development, so to speak, right? This demand for scientific education was not limited to Bengal. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, wow, founded the Aligarh Scientific Society, while Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, speaking at Calcutta's Albert Hall in 1882, declared that science is the true sovereign. Science is the true sovereign, and directly linked European imperialism to the flourishing of sciences in Europe. Again, दिस गाय जमाल अल-दिन अल-अफ़गानी, उसने बहुत उसको समझ में आ गया था कि जो इम्पीरियलिज्म है, जो यूरोपियन लोग सब जगह जाके रूल कर रहे हैं, साउथ अफ्रीका, इंडिया, अदर प्लेसेस, राइट, वो इट्स इम्पीरियलिज्म। और उसका सीधा वजह है कि साइंस बेटर है उनकी, उनको समझ है और उस समझ से वो वेपन्स बना सकते हैं, उस समझ से वो एडवांस्ड चीज़ें बना सकते हैं, एंड देन दे कैन क्लेम लीडरशिप इन वन वे और द अदर. इफ देयर क्लेम इज नॉट एक्सेप्टेड, देन दे कैन take it by force as well. These indigenous political actors operating within colonial contexts all argued for adopting modern science for societal progress, a position that Lafont would later echo and actively support. Okay, so but 1800s में ही दो चीज़ें हो गई थी बहुत important, right? Okay, moving ahead. But there was a crucial problem. The British colonial government showed little interest in promoting advanced scientific education among Indians. So, ठीक है, one is like basic mathematics, basic science, but advanced education. Imagine there is no IIT, there is no Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, there is no ISRO, there is no physical research laboratory in Ahmedabad. There is nothing right now. There is no advanced study going on in India. And Britishers are not even interested. उनको लगता है कि ये क्यों करें हम, right? This neglect wasn't accidental but reflected a deliberate policy rooted in imperial anxieties about creating an educated class that might challenge colonial authority. And boy were those anxieties correct, right? कि हम सिखा देंगे फिर ये लोग सीख जाएंगे. अब ये तो वो तो होता ही है. As one contemporary observer noted, higher learning would have created more awareness among the natives and thereby fueled discontent. The University of Calcutta, as one contemporary observer noted, higher learning would have created more awareness among the natives and thereby fueled discontent. जब हमें ज़्यादा समझ में आने लगता है ना, तो हमें ज़्यादा चीज़ें पता चलती हैं. When for example, all of these people, Nehru, Gandhi, Ambedkar, when they got English education, when they traveled to the UK, when Gandhi traveled to Africa, when Nehru traveled to Russia. So the scope becomes bigger and bigger. You see world in a more holistic sense. You understand how everything functions. Like if you know how the streets operate in a street in Russia, or how what technology is being developed in Germany, and when you're aware of all of those things, how rich other people are, how content other people are. Like if people from Delhi would know, or like would know what clean air feels like, or would like really care about it, then they would probably behave differently, think differently, act differently. So this is what education does, this is what awareness does, this is what meaningful travel does, and this is what 3 News Daily also does. As one contemporary observer noted, the University of Calcutta had dropped physical sciences from its BA curriculum in 1863 when the Asiatic Society proposed in 1869 that science should be studied properly at the university level. The government refused, claiming the time was not yet ripe. Acha. The discrimination went deeper than curriculum choices. The discrimination went deeper. Hello, hi, Ojas, how are you? बस मैं ठीक हूँ भाई. How are you? सब बढ़िया? Yeah, ironically, okay, wait, where were we? Sorry, I think I should just split my window into two so I can also see the comments while talking. So that will be much easier for me. Yes. Hello, Jas, if you are still there, please एक message छोड़ दो भाई. And I hope you are enjoying this. And thank you for staying back. Ayo. Where is it? 1 second. Jesuit, priest, India, Indian Express, science. Lovely. Okay. Got the article again. Perfect. Where is my chat window? Okay, it's here. Anyway, let's just continue to read. Yeah, I was in a nice, very cool flow actually. The discrimination went deeper than curriculum choices, as as W.S. Atkinson, director of public instruction in Bengal, dismissively remarked, the degradation of national intellect among the Hindus was deep seated. The degradation of national intellect among the Hindus was deep seated. That is what he said, W.S. Atkinson. Acha. His successor, Alfred Croft, but went further, claiming Indians were temperamentally unfit to teach the exact method of modern science. Yeah, well, J.C. Bose would like to disagree. Ramanujan would like to disagree. Several Indian mathematicians and engineers who serve, and doctors who serve a lot of people across the world now would like to disagree. But also a lot of Indian uncles would like to agree, like who just don't look at science the way it should be looked at. You know, they look at it from a sense of insecurity. I don't know why. This wasn't mere prejudice but strategic policy. The British had carefully kept scientific departments as a close preserve for Europeans and Eurasians. Even accomplished Indian scientists faced systematic discrimination. When J.C. Bose was appointed as the first Indian professor of physics at Presidency College in 1885, he received one-third of the salary of his European counterparts. हमारा प्रोफेसर जब बना तो उसको one-third of the salary मिली उसके European counterparts से. ठीक है. Ironically, this colonial neglect paralleled similar problems in 19th century Britain itself. As Charles Babbage had documented in his scathing 1830 critique, Reflections on the Decline of Science in England, British universities lagged behind their continental European counterparts in Prussia and the First Empire in France, where there was state support for research universities. Despite the development of a rich scientific culture exemplified by figures such as John Dalton, Charles Lyell, James Joule and Michael Faraday, last two we know, right? Joule, Faraday. The British government provided little financial support for scientific research and did not employ scientists till 1830s. Wow, very interesting. Babbage's campaign, alongside that of British Association for the Advancement of Science, founded in 1831, sought to professionalize science in Britain, but this modernization was denied to India. The Jesuit alternative. It was into this educational vacuum that Lafont stepped in with radically different vision, right? Abhi, we are here. British sirs have now realized that we cannot, overlook scientific development. Other people are doing it, but they are like guarded about it for Indians, right? It was into this educational vacuum that Lafont stepped in. With a radically different vision. From the very inception of the order, the Jesuits, Society of Jesus, had followed a scholastic path, establishing universities and being at the forefront of scientific activities since the 16th century. Christopher Clavius architected the Gregorian calendar reform of 1582. Interesting, right? Christoph Scheiner systematically documented sunspots. Francesco Grimaldi discovered light diffraction. Giovanni Battista Riccioli measured gravitational acceleration and introduced the current system of lunar nomenclature. Roger Boskowitz advanced knowledge on atomic theory. Angelo Secchi pioneered stellar spectroscopy. तो मतलब ये जो ये क्लब है, जो ये जेसुइट सोसाइटी है, जो ये सोसाइटी है वो स्कॉलर्स की सोसाइटी है और साइंस को बहुत आगे रखती है, साइंस और रिलीजन को साथ में लेके चलती है और साइंस को एट द फोरफ्रंट रखती है और ये उसकी लेगेसी है. सेंट जेवियर्स कॉलेज इन, और अब इस लेगेसी में लफॉन्ट आ गया और लफॉन्ट कैलकाटा में आ गया, तो इट्स प्रॉब्ली आवर टर्न नाउ. सेंट जेवियर्स कॉलेज इन कैलकाटा वाज एस्टैब्लिश्ड इन 1860 as part of this tradition, led by Henry Depelchen, who would later head the Zambezi missions, and Walter Steins, who became Archbishop and Fellow of Calcutta University. 8 Belgian Jesuits founded the institution at the old Sans Souci Theatre site on Park Street. ठीक है, तो इस ट्रेडिशन, जो सेंट जेवियर्स कॉलेज कैसे आया, तो ये जो एक आइकॉनिक कॉलेज है कैलकाटा का, वो आया ही इस जेसुइट सोसाइटी की वजह से. 1860 में इस ट्रेडिशन जो भी मैंने ऊपर बताया, इतने जो महान ऑल्सो they are part of a Jesuit society and they are also scientists in their own regard, right? Led by Henry Depelchen, who would later head the Zambezi missions, and Walter Steins, sorry, who became Archbishop and Fellow of Calcutta University. 8 Belgian Jesuits founded the institution at the old Sans Souci Theatre site on Park Street. So Park Street में बना ये बड़ा interesting सा college. It was uh, it was it was Depelchin who invited Lafont to replace Ignatius Carbonell, another accomplished scientist who had taught at St. Xavier's from 1861 to 1867 before returning to Belgium to become the professor of mathematics and astronomy at Louvain and the founder of the Scientific Society of Brussels. Wow. Okay, so अब लफॉन्ट कैसे आया? उसने किसी को रिप्लेस किया, राइट? जो जिसने जेवियर्स में पहले शुरू के 6-7 साल पढ़ाया था, ठीक है, वो अब वापस बेल्जियम चला गया क्योंकि उसको प्रोफेसर बनाया मैथमेटिक्स और एस्ट्रोनॉमी का, राइट? From its first prospectus in 1860, St. Xavier's College promised a course of studies similar to the great colleges of Europe. कि हमने बोला ही वहाँ पे, प्रॉमिस ही ये है कि हम ऐसा कोर्सेज बनाएंगे जो यूरोप के ग्रेट कॉलेजेस में होता है, राइट? ऑक्सफोर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी, ये यूनिवर्सिटी, वो यूनिवर्सिटी, एक्सप्लिसिटली डिफरेंशिएटिंग इटसेल्फ फ्रॉम ब्रिटिश इंस्टीट्यूशंस, राइट? ब्रिटिशर्स से थोड़ा अपने आप को अलग किया कि हम इनसे अलग हैं, ठीक है, हमें इनके साथ मत जोड़िए. हमने जो कॉलेजेस बनाए हैं फ्रांस में बनाए, मैंने आई सेड ऑक्सफोर्ड, बट हमने जो अलग इंस्टीट्यूशंस बनाई हैं, हम वो ग्रेट ट्रेडिशन को यहाँ पे रेप्लिकेट करेंगे. द डिस्टिंक्शन वॉज क्रूशियल. While British universities were struggling to modernize their scientific curricula, continental European institutions, particularly the post-Restoration Jesuit colleges, had successfully integrated modern scientific disciplines with humanistic education. Wow. The post-1814 Jesuit educational strategy, अब क्या थी उनकी strategy, right? अब ये इंडिया में, ये कैलकटा में, and this like, we will see if this becomes part of like what happens right now. The post-1814 Jesuit educational strategy, codified in the Reformed Ratio Studiorum of 1832, had embraced what they called fundamental rather than merely technical education. हम fundamentals clear करेंगे, हम सिर्फ technical education नहीं देंगे. This approach, implemented across Jesuit institutions from Liverpool to Buenos Aires, insisted that scientific knowledge must be grounded in broader intellectual and moral formation. Wow. कि साइंस फॉर द सेक ऑफ साइंस नहीं होगा, हम उसको ग्राउंड करेंगे इंटेलेक्चुअल फाउंडेशन में और मॉरल फाउंडेशन में, और क्या ज़रूरी है. और ये एक पेडागोजिकल मतलब पढ़ाने का तरीका. दिस पेडागोजिकल फिलॉसफी फाउंड रिमार्केबल रेजोनेंस विथ इंडियन एजुकेशनल एस्पिरेशंस, राइट? Just as the medical professional and social reformer Dr. Mahendralal Sarkar would later argue that science should serve moral and intellectual development rather than narrow vocational training. The Jesuits saw scientific education as a means of character formation and spiritual development. So yeah, like it is one thing to repair a car. It is one thing to know how exactly it functions. It is one thing to, put bricks. It is another thing to learn architecture. It is one thing to learn technical stuff. It is another thing to learn the fundamentals and know yourself how to make it. And it gives one so much more confidence. It gives one so much more intellectual awareness that you can now take on the world. You can now you have your own systems. If there is a problem and there doesn't exist a solution for it, you have the intellectual capacity now to devise solutions for problems which are unique to you, and you will only know of those problems if you're intellectually and morally aware person, right? That's what this philosophy was, and that is what was brought to Calcutta via St. Xavier's. For Lafont, trained in this tradition, science was never merely technical instruction, but always connected to larger questions about divine order and human dignity. Of course, he's a Jesuit also, so it's not just like a technical instruction, but connected to larger questions about divine order and human dignity. Lafont made physical sciences compulsory for all students at St. Xavier's, even as the University of Calcutta was removing it from its curriculum. उसने compulsory कर दिया कि physical sciences सबको पढ़नी है. Earth कैसे बना, ये कैसे हुआ, right? Physical sciences जो भी हम physically समझ सकते हैं, not atomic, like on the physical level. He established India's first modern physics laboratory and meteorological observatory, equipped with cutting-edge instruments acquired through Jesuit networks across Europe. एक इंडिया में मॉडर्न फिजिक्स लैबोरेटरी आई, राइट? फिजिक्स के एक्सपेरिमेंट्स होने लगे. द फैसिनेटिंग, व्हाट कैन बी मोर फंडामेंटल देन फिजिक्स. एंड मीटरोलॉजिकल ऑब्जर्वेटरी। अब हम तारों को देख रहे हैं, और किससे देख रहे हैं? कटिंग एज इंस्ट्रूमेंट से, जो यूरोप में जहाँ वहाँ के जो स्टूडेंट्स जो इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स को यूज़ कर रहे हैं, वो भी हम भी वही इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स को यूज़ कर रहे हैं। His barometric prediction saved countless lives during the devastating cyclone of November 1867, earning him widespread recognition and establishing his credibility as a serious scientist, right? उसने कुछ प्रेडिक्ट किया था जिससे बहुत लोगों की जान बची, तो लफॉन्ट became like sort of a hero. Yet Lafont's impact went beyond individual achievements. He understood something that the British colonial administration missed: the difference between producing skilled workers and creating independent thinkers. Right, there are skilled workers and then there are independent thinkers. That was what his philosophy was. Now one can argue like how how many independent thinkers are there in India, but I would say there are, and there is that culture. Has it happened for a lot of majority? No. Are we still plagued with some systems that are fundamentally not scientific, like for example the caste system? It is fundamentally not a scientific system. So but we still burden our mind with it, and when I burden my mind with it, it is something that stops me from thinking independently. So that need, but now that is also finally slowly going, as more and more people talk, as more and more people have platform to share their experiences. So that is also happening in one way or the other, but not as much as it should have. Lafont's work was also intersected with that of Pietro Angelo Secchi, the pioneering astrophysicist, whose spectroscopic innovations had revolutionized astronomy in Rome. When Pietro and Secchi arrived in India in 1874 to observe the transit of Venus across the Sun, it was Lafont who collaborated with them, establishing a spectroscopic laboratory at St. Xavier's College, modeled on those in Palermo and Rome. Through this joint mission, Lafont transformed St. Xavier's into a node within international scientific networks. So when he calls all of these scientists from across the world, so then St. Xavier's sort of becomes this place where people meet, where people talk. Because when these professors or these scientists would come on the campus, students would be eager to talk to them. They would probably take 1 or 2 lectures with them. They would probably walk the halls with them, and that would give our students so much more confidence when people of knowledge walk the university campuses, because that is what education is all about. So I think it becomes very important when you have learned something, and it becomes very important for you to like give that away to other people in one way or the other. You may not have learned everything, but there is always enough for you to give to other people. There is always enough for you to share with other people, and you might not even know who you might inspire to do what. So that is something that we should think about, and like that is what was going on back then. That would be so cool to observe, as a student back then, if you were privileged enough, and I'm sure you come from a certain caste and class, right? uh, yeah, node. He transformed St. Xavier's into a node within international scientific networks, while his observations of solar protuberances and spectroscopic measurements contributed directly to the work of the Italian Society of Spectroscopists. Wow. The great debate: technical training versus fundamental sciences. The founding of the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Sciences sparked a crucial debate that revealed the complex intellectual currents of the time. क्या बातें हो रही थी? At a meeting in January 1876, the Indian League, led by nationalist journalist Shishir Kumar Ghosh, argued for technical and industrial training rather than abstract science. Good thought, right? Reverend K.M. Banerjee questioned the practical utility of pure science in a society where university graduates already struggle to find employment. कि हम क्यों करें, हम fundamentals पे कैसे resources spend करें जब हमारी population इतनी poor है. हम technical education क्यों ना सिखाएं लोगों को. So this is a very valid debate that was going on at that point in time. Sarkar, however, remained firm in his opposition to this vocational approach. I want an institution, he declared, in which men may engage in long courses of original scientific research after they have passed through their pupillage. It was here that Lafont provided crucial support, warning that to teach the applications of science without its principles is to put the cart before the horse. Like if you just give people technical education, if you don't teach them how certain things are made, You can teach them, okay, you use cement and bricks to make materials, to make bridges, but if you don't teach them material science, if you don't teach them how you can manufacture different sorts of materials, then that knowledge will get outdated at one point in time. But if you, it is almost like, give a man a fish versus teaching a man how to fish. So it is from these fundamental sciences that technical, derivations keep coming out. I always feel that, once the principles are in place, and once and this tinkering only results in something extraordinary all the time. Something new will only come from this fundamental tinkering that happens, in labs, where your scientists, or where your super educated people, or smart people, or people who got the chance, they just do it for the sake of doing it. They just try to understand things for the sake of understanding them, and the freedom is given to make mistakes, the freedom is given to take risks, and that freedom and that support, yields results after some point in time, versus just giving somebody technical education, right? This wasn't merely a pedagogical dispute, it was a fight for intellectual dignity. Lafont recognized that technical training without fundamental understanding would perpetuate colonial dependency, right? Of course. Today we produce our own stuff, or at least we try to. Make in India is something that we say today. When he supported Sarkar's vision for the IACS in 1876, Lafont articulated a position that would seem remarkably prescient. प्रेसिएंट मतलब कि बहुत आगे की सोच रहा था वो, 100-150 साल आगे की सोच रहा था. The other association wanted to perform the other association wanted to transform the Hindus into a number of mechanics requiring forever European supervision, whereas Sarkar's object was to emancipate in the long run his countrymen from this humiliating bondage. Why must I require a white man in NASA? Why must I require a white man to make weapons for me? Why must I require a white man to solve my scientific problems? Why must I require a white man to do my food grain research? Why can't I do it? Why can't my fellow countrymen do it? Why can't we develop systems? What is already happening in China? It was like sometimes it's just hopeless where India lost along the way, although it is quite evident where. But still, all of this was going on at that time, and like we still come from that rich intellectual history, and I'm sure that will yield some benefit or the other, to my fellow countrymen. Yeah, so he said, okay, his position echoed broader 19th century debates across Europe about the relationship between classical education and scientific training, where evidence consistently showed that students with strong foundational education outperformed those with narrow technical training. Finding God in all things. Now, after all, he was a Jesuit. So, what was the theological dimension of Lafont, right? What enabled a Catholic priest to become such a passionate advocate for Indian scientific independence? The answer lies in Jesuit theology and educational philosophy. Jesuits of the Society of Jesus had long embraced the maxim of finding God in all things, which allowed for a comfortable integration of scientific inquiry with religious things. For Lafont, science was not a secular pursuit, but a means of revealing the divine order of nature. Like, how does God do the things that He does? That is what science was for Lafont. This theological framework aligned remarkably well with Sarkar's own understanding of science. Sarkar, though a Hindu reformer, similarly viewed science as a short name for positive knowledge acquired by the human intellect by coming into contact with the works of God. Both men saw scientific practice not as materialistic reductionism, but as a spiritual quest that could purify thought and cultivate moral character. Like the closer you go to science, the closer you become God, the closer you come to God. This convergence wasn't coincidental. It reflected broader global currents in 19th century intellectual life, where scientific authority was often mobilized to support religious and cultural revival rather than to displace it. The apparent conflict between science and religion that we often assume was more complex than traditionally portrayed. A global movement. Lafont's approach to science education was part of a worldwide Jesuit strategy that extended far beyond colonial India. सिर्फ यहाँ नहीं हो रहा था. In Liverpool, for instance, Father Terence Donnelly was implementing remarkably similar reforms at St. Francis Xavier's College, integrating modern scientific training with classical education to serve working class Catholic students seeking upward mobility. Same thing was happening there, right? Like Lafont, Donnelly resisted a narrow vocationalism, while embracing scientific innovation. This global perspective helps us understand why Lafont could simultaneously embrace cutting edge spectroscopy and defend Catholic doctrine, or why his meteorological observatory could be connected to both Roman astronomers and Italian spectroscopists. Religion was sort of binding them. Science in the 19th century was not simply diffusing from Europe to its colonies, it was being actively constructed through global networks that included missionary orders, indigenous intellectuals, and colonial institutions. Right. The legacy from Bose to national science. I will just read that last line again. Science in the 19th century was not simply diffusing from Europe to its colonies, it was being actively constructed through global networks that included missionary orders, indigenous intellectuals, and colonial institutions. Right, everything was involved. It was being constructed. Legacy. Now, Bose, enter Bose. From Bose to national science. The fruits of this collaboration between Lafont and Indian scientists like Sarkar became evident in the careers of their students, Jagdish Chandra Bose, J.C. Bose, who studied under Lafont at St. Xavier's and later conducted research at the IACS, became the first Indian physicist to lecture at the Royal Institution in London. His pioneering work in radio waves and plant physiology earned international recognition, proving that Indians could not only learn science but could contribute original discoveries to global knowledge. I wonder why does it not happen often enough now? Yet even Bose faced the racial discrimination that Lafont had warned against. When appointed as the first Indian prof of physics at Presidency College in 1885, he was paid only one-third of what his European counterparts received. This discrimination vindicated the approach that Lafont and Sarkar had championed. Indians need their own institutions where they could pursue science on their own terms, right? We do, and we still do. We still do. It is not enough. But scientific temper is also another thing. And science is so deeply connected with a little bit of politics also. How can you teach people to be scientific without telling them, without making them intellectually and morally more responsible people, you know? And developing infrastructure for them, support for them, so that they pursue their quest for knowledge and application in India rather than dreaming. Every person who is good at science, I think, at one point or the other has thought about what if I get out? What if I go to a better university abroad? Anyway, coming back, rethinking colonial education. The story of Eugene Lafont challenges several assumptions about colonial education. First, it shows that the demand for modern scientific knowledge came as much from Indians as it was imposed by colonizers. Dono side tha. Second, it reveals that some of the most effective support for Indian intellectual independence came from unexpected quarters, not from British liberals but from Belgian Jesuits whose theological commitments aligned with Indian aspirations for dignity and autonomy. Most importantly, Lafont's career demonstrates that the development of modern science in India was not simply a story of Western knowledge overwhelming Indian indigenous traditions. Instead, it was a complex process of negotiation, adaptation, and creative synthesis that involved multiple actors. Complex process of negotiation, adaptation, and creative synthesis that involved multiple actors with different motivations but convergent goals. सबके motivations अलग थे पर सबका goal एक था, fortunately. This does not mean that we should ignore the real violence and disruption that colonial education often entailed, but it does suggest that our understanding of this history needs to be more nuanced. When we reduce the story to a simple binary of colonial imposition versus indigenous resistance, we miss the creative ways in which Indian intellectuals and their allies, including figures like Lafont, worked to build institutions that could serve both scientific advancement and national dignity. As India today grapples with questions about the relationship between traditional knowledge and modern science, between national pride and global engagement, the story of Eugene Lafont offers valuable insights. His career shows that it is possible to, he lived in for 43 years in India. His career shows that it is possible to embrace modern scientific knowledge without abandoning cultural identity, to engage with global networks while maintaining institutional autonomy. Perhaps most importantly, Lafont's collaboration with Sarkar demonstrates that the pursuit of scientific knowledge can be a deeply moral and spiritual enterprise. One that serves not just economic development but human flourishing in its broadest sense. In an era where science is often reduced to its technological applications, this vision of science as a tool for moral and intellectual development remains profoundly relevant. You know, like it's just insane. It is so cool, right? The Belgian Jesuit who spent his life in Calcutta may have been forgotten by popular history, but his legacy lives on in the Indian scientific institutions and in ideas of science as a means of human liberation rather than domination. When the more you do science, the closer you come to God. That legacy deserves to be remembered, and the lessons applied to our contemporary challenges. 100%. 100%. Scientific temper is something that is so less. It is not a part of our culture. Scientific temper somehow still is not part of our culture, and it is very, very sad. Like, I would love if somebody would want to come on this live and discuss how we can, and but it is also through things like these, through lives like these. If these lives reach many, many people, and they start discussing things, they start thinking about these things, then I think this culture will develop further, and it will actually happen. There might actually happen something rather than this remaining still within private universities, you know, things like that. So great article. Thank you, Rohan Basu. It was written by Rohan Basu for the Indian Express. Now we move on to the next one, guys. Hello. Is anybody there? If you're there, raise your hand. Raise your hand. Show me live chat. Show me live chat. Oh, hello, Sudeepto. Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hope you are still tuned in. Love it. Thank you for your support. All right, let's keep doing it. Please subscribe to the channel and please drop comments, guys. If you come here on the live and you see me and you enjoy what you see, please drop comments, because that will help the live reach many more people, and we can create sort of a movement, right? I want to really talk to as many people as possible about as many different subjects as possible. Every day could be a day of learning, if I really think about it. And if you guys support, and if you guys watch, nothing like it. Like that will give me so much joy, and I would do this with so much more integrity, and bring the best stuff for you continuously, every day, because this is something that I love to do. And if I can do this full time, if you guys can help me do this full time, then nothing like it. Like, it would be just amazing. I would love to speak to you guys for 5 hours, 6 hours every day, if we reach that point at any point in time, which I think we will. So if you're watching right now, or if you're hearing right now, and you feel good, you are enjoying this conversation that I am having with you, one-sided maybe it may be, but please, drop a comment, subscribe, share it with your friends, tell other people about it, and just talk to me mainly, right? Because I need people right now and even later. All right, very quickly, 5 landmarks of Bihar politics, from Shri Babu to Susashan Babu. क्या हुआ? Let's read. Very interesting. बिहार में elections आ रहे हैं, तो बिहार की बातें तो करेंगे हम लोग. The political prism of Bihar has reflected and refracted shades of almost every ideology since India's first general elections. हर ideology बिहार में दिखी है. ऐसी कोई ideology नहीं है जो बिहार में नहीं हुआ, जो कभी बिहार में जिसने रूट नहीं लिया. The state saw 3 decades of Congress dominance. 1952 से 1990 तक कांग्रेस थी. बहुत सारे states में कांग्रेस थी. With its first chief minister Sri Krishna Singh laying the foundation of modern Bihar. The Congress hegemony was challenged by socialist legend Ram Manohar Lohia in 1967. Another leading socialist Jai Prakash Narayan led the 1974 Bihar movement, the BJP movement, heralding the rise of socialist politics. Lalu Prasad and Nitish Kumar later cemented that legacy, ruling Bihar for 35 years, with the BJP sharing power with Nitish for about 17 of them. So what are some 5 defining landmarks of Bihar's political journey? This is an article by Santosh Singh, again for the Indian Express. Here are 5 defining landmarks of Bihar's political journey. Congress, Shri Babu and beyond. Okay, when the history of Congress in Bihar is written, it will likely be divided into 2 eras, with Sri Krishna Singh and after him. Singh, who also wrote his name as Sinha, served as Pradhan Mantri, Premier of Bihar province from 1937 to 1939, and from 1946 to 1952 and as the chief minister from 1952 until his death in 1961. So basically he was the, and Bihar right now, you have to imagine Bihar is also Jharkhand at that point in time. Bihar is huge, right? And this guy ruled Bihar for more than 20 years, 1937, 47, 57, more than 23 years. Congress, dominated by upper caste leadership since the 1930s, retained that hierarchy in power. The rivalry between Sri Krishna Singh, a Bhumiyar, and the caste group where also I think Kanhaiya Kumar comes from, who is in the Congress now, one big huge Congress leader, and his deputy Anugrah Narayan Singh, a Rajput, was well known. There was a rivalry between this Bhumiyar guy and this Rajput guy was well known, though marked by mutual respect. Rivalry hai par mutual respect hai. After the 1957 election, when Anugrah staked claim to the CM's post, Sri Krishna Singh told him he would quit politics if he lost. Anugrah assured him that it would not come to that, and it didn't. Sri Babu, as he was fondly called, is said to have wept in Anugrah's arms before taking oath again as CM, asking his deputy to choose the cabinet. So they became friends. Beyond such anecdotes, Sri Krishna Singh is remembered as the maker of modern Bihar. He laid the groundwork for industrialization, setting up 13 industrial units in Begusarai alone and promoting sugar, jute, paper, and cement factories across the state. Right, theek hai. He also founded several educational and medical institutions, and the Damodar Valley Corporation (DVC) was established during his tenure. Singh was instrumental in securing Dalit entry into the Baba Baidyanath temple in Deoghar, now in Jharkhand. Wow. Personally, he lived frugally. ज़्यादा पैसा खर्चा नहीं करता था. Journalist Surendra Kishore recalls that he resisted any attempt to bring his son into politics. But the Congress failed to sense changing social currents. अब कांग्रेस ने social currents समझे नहीं. ग्राउंड पे क्या हो रहा है कांग्रेस को कभी पता होता नहीं है. In 1963, it missed a chance to make OBC leader Bir Chand Patel chief minister after Vinodanand Jha's removal under the Kamraj plan. कि एक झा assuming upper caste उसको हटाया, तो एक OBC लीडर को बनाना था उनको चीफ मिनिस्टर, पर वो उन्होंने नहीं किया. कांग्रेस dominated by upper castes. Instead, Satyendra Narayan Sinha, son of Anugrah Narayan Singh, जो second in command था, backed by KB Sahai as CM, preserving upper caste hegemony. Wow. In the following decades too, Congress overlooked OBC leaders. Congress continued to overlook OBC leaders. You know, like Ram Lakhan Singh Yadav, Lahatan Chaudhary, and Sitaram Kesari, rotating upper caste chief ministers Jagannath Misra, Chandrasekhar Singh, Bindeshwari Dubey, Bhagwat Azad, Jha Azad, Satyendra Narayan Sinha, and again Mishra. Between 1980 and 1990, notably no Congress CM after Sri Krishna completed full term. श्री कृष्ण सिन्हा ने 21 ईयर्स तक राज किया बिहार पे, उसके बाद एक भी कांग्रेस सीएम ने फुल टर्म नहीं बनाया. तो कॉम्पिटिटिव हो गई थी पॉलिटिक्स, देश आज़ाद हो गया, बाकी लोगों को अपनी वॉइस मिल रही है, वो वॉइस कांग्रेस अब रिप्रेजेंट नहीं कर रही है, तो लोगों विरोध कर रहे हैं, दूसरे लोगों को वोट दे रहे हैं, अलग अलग स्टॉलवर्ड्स आ रहे हैं. अब क्या होता है, सोशलिस्ट लोग कैसे आए, सोशलिस्ट कल्चर कैसे आया, and the dawn of OBC politics, which is currently dominating India, right? Veteran socialist and RJD National Vice President Shivanand Tiwari recalls being at Patna's Gandhi Maidan in 1965 with his father Ramanand Tiwari and Karpuri Thakur, who later CM, when Ram Manohar Lohia launched his anti-Congress campaign. Right? I'm assuming वो part of Congress था, jilted. Now he has launched his campaign. Several leaders, including Ramanand Tiwari, Karpuri Thakur, Kapil Dev Singh, Shivanand Tiwari, and CPI leaders Chandrasekhar Singh were injured in a police lathi charge. Big guns injured in a police lathi charge. Lohia had merged the Socialist Party with the Praja Socialist Party to form the Sanyukt Socialist Party and gave the slogan Sansopa ne bandhi ghaat, pichhda paave sau mein saath. SSP pledges 60% reservation for backward classes. His campaign paid off. Congress lost the 1967 assembly polls in 9 states, including Bihar. 1967 assembly polls, 9 states में Congress हारी, including Bihar. Nehru is gone. The dream of independence, the euphoria of independence is gone, and now Congress is gone. The SSP emerged as the largest partner in the anti-Congress alliance with 68 seats. कोई अपने दम पे नहीं जीता था, वो लोग सब अब बन रहे थे ना. And Karpuri Thakur was expected to become CM, but Kamakhya Narayan Singh, leader of the smaller Jan Kranti Dal, 26 seats, maneuvered his party's Mahamaya Prasad Sinha to the top post, with Karpuri reluctantly accepting the deputy's chair against the wishes of his mentor Lohia. Right? Okay. This coalition, known as the Samyukt Vidhayak Dal (SVD), also ended the political isolation of the Bharatiya Jansangh. वो भी उसका पार्ट थे कोalition के. भारतीय जनसंघ which would later go on to become the भारतीय जनता पार्टी, उसको तब तक पॉलिटिकल आइसोलेशन में रखा था. अब वो पार्ट बन गई थी. ठीक है, अब धीमे धीमे क्या होता है. Between 1967 and 1972, Bihar saw 7 chief ministers within like 7 years. Satish Prasad Singh became the first OBC CM, albeit only for 5 days, paving the way for BP Mandal. Other like OBC leaders, Daroga Prasad Rai, EBC leader Karpuri Thakur, and Dalit leader Bhola Paswan Shastri also had brief stints. It was the first real arrival of socialist politics in Bihar. JP, Janta, and Karpuri's quota within quota. In the early 1970s, inspired by Gujarat's Navnirman Andolan, JP emerged from retirement to lead the students' movement in Bihar. Retire हो गया था, student movement lead किया था. JP movement ultimately led to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi imposing the emergency in 1975. Emergency लगानी पड़ गई. Among the movement's products were student leaders. पर वो movement से कौन निकला? राइट लालू प्रसाद यादव और नीतीश कुमार वो उस मूवमेंट का पार्ट बने, वहाँ से वो लीडर्स बने, और देन द रेस्ट इज हिस्ट्री. By the time Indira Gandhi lifted the emergency in 1977, her government had become deeply unpopular. The Janata Party coalition of non-Congress forces swept to power, marking a second wave of socialist ascendancy and bringing EBC leader Karpuri Thakur to the CM's chair in Bihar. In November 1978, Karpuri implemented the Mungeri Lal Commission's recommendations, pioneering the classification, and this is all stemming from caste. Congress has become upper caste. Now these other caste people are finding their voices, and because the population is full of people who are from OBC, lot of people who are from OBC areas, OBC castes, they are coming now to power, right? They are now coming to power. Yeah. So now what they did was Mungeri Lal Commission's के recommendations को implement किया, pioneering the classification of OBCs and EBCs and introducing reservations for women and the poor among upper castes. ये सब कुछ दिया. Of the 26% quota, 12 went to EBCs, 8 to OBCs, and 3 each to women and poor. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 10% EWS quota draws inspiration from Karpuri's quota within quota policy कि गरीब जो EBC हैं, जो जनरल कास्ट के गरीब हैं, उनको भी रिजर्वेशन मिलना चाहिए. The Janta experiment later collapsed, but it again exposed Congress's inability to read Bihar's political pulse, social pulse. The Mandal era. अब Mandal era में क्या हुआ? लालू प्रसाद rises. Barely a year after Karpuri Thakur's death in 1988, VP Singh became Prime Minister on the anti-Bofors wave, as Congress weakened. The 1989 Bhagalpur riots, in which over 800 Muslims and 200 Hindus were killed, pushed Muslim voters towards Janta Dal. Right? Congress, so many years, Congress was the BJP, and now for so many years, BJP is the new Congress. That is something that I always think about. When Lalu Prasad became Chief Minister in March 1990, he seized the space opened by the clash between Mandal and Kamandal politics. He emerged as the new champion of Muslims and the Garib Gurba, poor, marking the third socialist phase in Bihar politics. Lalu and later Rabdi Devi rule saw 3 defining shifts: the Mandalization, secularization, and Yadavization of politics. During the Yadav-centric phase, Lalu began losing support among EBCs and Dalits. Right? His tenure brought social empowerment but also notoriety. 38 caste massacres claimed 380 lives, and kidnappings and robberies eroded law and order. Amid this churn, another JP product, Nitish Kumar, spotted his chance. So now Nitish Kumar ka turn. The Nitish NDA era, Nitish Kumar, who co-founded the Samata Party in 1994 as a Janta Dal breakaway, began with modest success, winning only 7 seats in 1995. He later reworked his social arithmetic and convinced George Fernandez to join the NDA in 1996. Though the RJD emerged as the largest party in 2000, the NDA was invited to form the government. The then Prime Minister A.B. Vajpayee asked Nitish to take charge as CM. Knowing he lacked a majority, Nitish resigned within a week, but his political stature rose sharply. This one move also relegated BJP's Sushil Kumar Modi to the second rung. Nitish finally became CM in 2005 and except for a 9-month interlude under Jitan Ram Manjhi has remained in power since. He layered Bihar's caste politics with a developmental narrative, reshaping its political grammar. Nitish is a rare figure in Indian politics, a leader from the community comprising less than 3% of the population, Kurmi community से आते हैं, who has remained CM for nearly 2 decades. Uh, breaking Shri Krishna Singh's record as Bihar's longest serving chief minister. Wow. The coming elections will reveal whether the state is poised for another political landmark. Will be very cool to know what happens next. Interesting. Not completely enlightening, but at least we got some summary. Now we understand a little bit what was going on. Congress, fully uppercast, failing to read the social pulse. OBC politics comes. Several chief ministers' role. Karpuri Thakur becomes important, quota within quota. Then Lalu Prasad Yadav comes, and then Nitish Kumar comes, and the socialist nature of Bihar politics remains there. Caste is super important, as in any other state, as of course. All right, last article for today. It's a long one. I hope you guys are having fun. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you're really having fun. All right. Two are watching right now. If you are watching right now, please comment. I would love to hear from you. The third article that we're going to be reading is lessons from India's long journey to gaining the right to fly. I am super intrigued about like how aviation came to India and how we are so good at flying. Like India is one of the best countries, even among global aviation standards. So how did all of that happen for India? Yeah, let's just read. Sudeepto, hello. Ojas bhai, aap ho to hello bolo. Nahi ho to it's okay. Okay, Priya Mirza. This is an article by Priya Mirza for Caravan. Let's just get right into it. When British rule of South Asia ended in 1947, a patchwork of 565 princely states representing about 40% of the region's land area remained out of India and Pakistan's fold. The fledgling Indian state had less than 3 years to incorporate this vast region into a unitary post-colonial nation, while simultaneously managing the brutality of partition, ensuring the handing over of governance from British and writing a constitution. बहुत काम करना था लोगों को, इंडिया में भी, पाकिस्तान में भी, princely states में भी, सारी जगहों पे, right? Without the use of aviation, it would have been impossible for the civil servant VP Menon and the first Deputy Prime Minister Vallabhbhai Patel to get instruments of accession signed by nearly every princely state. Nehru, Patel and Menon flew the length of the subcontinent countless times, negotiating feverishly with the British in Shimla and in princely states as far-flung as Travancore and Jammu and Kashmir, knitting together the state territorially at a speed permissible only by air. हवा में ही उड़ रहे थे ये लोग, सारे के सारे लोग, यहाँ जाओ, यहाँ पे इंस्ट्रूमेंट ऑफ एक्सेशन साइन करो, जूनागढ़ में कुछ हो गया, कश्मीर में कुछ हो गया, ट्रावनकोर में कुछ हो गया. They are doing all of that. Nehru's preference for aviation survived the heady initial years of the Republic, right? During the first general elections held in 1951, Nehru travelled more than 18,000 miles by air, covering the country along with rail, road and boat rides in 9 weeks. Nehru's penchant for flying across the country came up in parliamentary discussion. In 1952, V.G. Deshpande, the General Secretary of the Akhil Bharatiya Hindu Mahasabha, asked, why was an aeroplane of the Government of India placed at the Prime Minister's disposal, in which he travelled all over the country? I know how ministers misuse their power. Nehru declined to comment. Okay. Nehru's often uncompromising fascination with flying, and then Nehru's daughter Indira's son Rajiv was also a pilot who is also interested in aviation. So Nehru's often uncompromising fascination with flying might not have yielded the best results for the Indian polity at large. Unlike the access to most rights, which saw progressive growth following decolonization, the access to flight saw further restriction in the Nehru years. In British India, despite flight being largely monopolized by a narrow elite, strides were often made towards further democratization. A broader historiography of Indian aviation might help illustrate this. चलो पढ़ते हैं क्या हो रहा था. The National Archives of India have hundreds of yellowing doc records about aviation in this period, which I studied. From its inception in the early 1900s, access to flight, both domestically and internationally, has gotten progressively more democratic. ठीक है. हाँ, ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा लोग फ्लाई कर रहे हैं, मैं भी फ्लाई कर रहा हूँ, वो मेरे बाद और भी फ्लाई करेंगे. However, when governments attempted to facilitate air travel only for a few, arbitrarily, as Nehru did in the 1950s, it ironically often had the opposite effect, right? The historical record shows that both access to fly and the right to fly abroad were gained by individual attempts to combat state control. The record also sheds light on how centralized control and lack of emphasis on meeting technical requirements are the main threats to these rights. Okay. Before there were pilots and passengers, there were airmen, airwomen, and airships, right? With the introduction of powered aircraft in the early 20th century, the skies too became a medium of movement. To fly, to fly, to be a part to be a part of the air in those machines was a privilege, a claim to be to the loftier. It was claimed imperially first by the Indian princes, right, who had both the wealth and the interest to purchase these early flying machines. As early as 1911, in Hyderabad, Pierre de Caters, a Belgian adventurer and aviator, made flying exhibition shows the rage. This was a good stand at making money too. The Times later described Nizam Mir Osman Ali Khan, the ruler of Hyderabad, as the wealthiest man in the world and thus an ideal client for Caters. Most of Caters' flight were joyrides for the elite of Hyderabad a century ago, who were willing to pay vast sums for the thrill of being in the air. But why just ride an airplane when you can buy one? In 1911, the Maharaja of Kapurthala, a small princely state in present day Punjab, was the first to inquire about these flying machines. He went on to buy a Farman biplane built by the British company. Other princes in Alwar, Jodhpur, Bikaner, Patiala, Bharatpur and Hyderabad followed, right? सब लोगों ने अपने अपने plane खरीदे in महाराजाओं ने. Many constructed aerodromes, often just a large open field, and then hired European pilots to fly them. What are aerodromes? A small airport or an airfield. All right, let's go. But why just, ठीक है. Others learned to fly themselves. To fly was to embody a heavenly divine air, a marker of regality in a deeply feudal and colonial society. The prestige of flying was often advertised to other princes too. In 1921, when the Chamber of Princes, an assembly representing the princes of various states, was inaugurated in New Delhi, the Maharaja of Mandla flew overhead as casually as others travelled in their regal royal train carriages. Aerodromes mushroomed across the princely territories during the following decades, with dots on the map steadily growing in Badhal, Bharatpur, Bhopal, Bandi, Cochin, जयपुर, जोधपुर, कालका, मोरवी, हैदराबाद एंड ट्रैवनकोर. यहाँ सब एयरफील्ड्स आने लग गई थी. ठीक है, ये सब जो राजा महाराजा थे. फ्रॉम द तो यहीं से एविएशन आया, पैसे से आता है एविएशन, आई गेस. From the inception of aviation in India, indignation among rulers and their subjects arose over the perceived violation of the sovereignty of air. जयपुर वाला सोच रहा है मेरे सर के ऊपर से इसका प्लेन कैसे जा रहा है. The idea that air above is as inviolable as the land below. Indian princes were long assured of their internal territorial sovereignty by the British. During my research at the Archives of India, I came across several records documenting the unease of these flying machines flying over princely lands. Archival records show that the Maharaja of Jaipur complained that the faces of women in the palace would now be easily visible to pilots flying overhead. Another prince protested when a Swedish pilot aerially photographed a fortress. Drone shots. This was seen as an aerial violation of their privacy, a matter taken up seriously by the princes. The matter was settled in 1931 with the British framing rules which admitted that the sovereignty of the rulers of states over their territories embraces the airspace over those territories. यहाँ से plane मत चलाओ. They, however, maintained that for security purposes, British naval or military forces would be free to fly over and land in the territories of the state. सिक्योरिटी पर्पसेस के लिए करेंगे, बाकी लोगों को ना बोल देंगे, प्रिंसेस को तो और क्या चाहिए, वो नहीं सोच रहे थे ज़्यादा, आई गैस. Elsewhere, clamor arose about how the airspace above sacred sites were sacred as well, violated by planes flying overhead. Across religions, Parsis, Sikh, Muslims, and Hindus shot off angry letters over the aerial violation of sacred sites, an attitude which seemed to have gently broken down after aviation became more abundant and practical. But not before a Parsi gentleman wrote a detective novel about the outrage among the Parsis when a small aircraft photographed a tower of silence, a site where Zoroastrians dispose of the dead in Bombay. Wow. Tower of Silence. Interesting. Zoroastrians. That's very crazy. How Zoroastrians dispose of the dead is itself in a crazy story. Like, I must read about it. Others thought they could profit off of it. Right? Archival records reveal that in 1935, in the Delhi Legislative Assembly, inquiries were made about creating an aerial route to the Hindu pilgrimage site in the village of Badrinath, present-day Uttarakhand. The request fell on deaf ears, though. An aerial route to the site only opened in 1974 with the inauguration of an airport in Dehradun. In the 1930s and 40s, air-mindedness took root outside of princely states too. The British, whose aviators and aviatresses flew across India in international races from Paris and Saigon, encouraged civil aviation in colonial India. This was primarily done by setting up flying clubs and supporting Indian students to study aviation in Great Britain. ठीक है. Almost 30s, 40s aa gaye hain. Britishers are packing up. The princes were the first to jump at this opportunity, with the Maharaja of Jodhpur even going on to graduate from the Royal Air Force College in Cranwell in 1926. He became the first Indian prince to be awarded a pilot's license. Jodhpur ka Maharaja pehla Indian prince tha to be awarded a pilot's license. That's a quiz question. Archival records hint at a rich history marked by all sorts of players, from air exhibitions to those offering aerial rides. In 1934, India Air Pageants LTS, a private air display company, arrived in India to give a series of exhibitions at various centers in British India and in the Indian states. As a demonstration of the growing interest, there were several subsidized flying clubs in British India, such as the Delhi Flying Club and the Karachi Aero Club. There were also flying clubs in Karachi, Madras, Lahore, Jodhpur, and Bengal, and the ponderously named North India Dum Northern India Flying Club. The only unsubsidized one was the Kathiawad Flying Club, which was funded by a group of Indian financiers keen to give joyrides and pressed with the urgent need to transport newspapers between Bombay and Kathiawad in present-day Gujarat. Very, very interesting. So these clubs are there now, right? It's a little bit subsidized also. So hua kya? There were 8 private airlines in 1930s. Capitalists like the Tatas, Birlas, and Dalmias, and princely states like those of Hyderabad and Darbhanga owned private commercial airlines. Those controlled by private firms include Orient Airways, Kalinga Airways, Jamair, Himalayan Aviation, Deccan Airways, and Ambika Airlines. All these airplanes largely carried the wealthy, businessmen, travelers, and other flyers who could afford the prices. Aviation and the freedom it offered came to at least one prince's aid quite literally in 1947. The Nawab of Junagadh, a tiny princely state in present-day Gujarat, landlocked by India, who had declared his intention to accede to Pakistan, had a special plane chartered. In the clamor in deciding whether to accede to India or Pakistan that year, others also thought of turning to air fleets. The Nizam of Hyderabad, who wanted to create a sovereign state, asked Christopher Courtney, the British Air Chief Marshal, about the creation of a modern air force for Hyderabad. The Nawab of Bhopal, who was close ally of Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Muslim League, but later reluctantly acceded to India, inquired about the purchase of Mistri Airlines. Both these ideas were nipped in the bud with Patel's speedy flights across the country. Patel. Nehru's altered the Nehru altered the aerial landscape. He first opened, then closed the sky that had aided the INC in establishing a subcontinental presence. Following the Second World War, British India's Director of Civil Aviation, FC Timms, had recommended that not more than 4 private players should fly in the country to ensure efficient and economic operations. In 1946, Nehru's interim government rejected this, allowing private companies to mushroom in the country. By the time independence from British colonial rule was declared, there were 11 operators in India. Wow. In 1950, an air transport inquiry committee was set up, headed by G.S. Raja Dhyaksha, a High Court judge. The committee recommendations pointed to Tim's conclusion: India had too many operators, amounting to wasteful competition and increased costs. Right? Demand itni nahi hogi, I guess. So far under the Ministry of Communications, headed by Jagjeevan Ram, air transport has lumbered on. Jaipal Singh Munda, a member of parliament, made public several concerns he had about the competency of the ministry to manage aviation. Munda, a highly decorated academic and Adivasi leader, was the president of Delhi Flying Club. Wow, he was also a president of the Delhi. Munda also was the first person to give the call for Jharkhand. In a discussion in the Lok Sabha, he questioned the efficiency and employability these flying clubs were producing in 1952. He pointed out that 196 pilots completed their course in 1952 with no clear employment in sight. Munda also questioned the rationale of spending crores for the construction of a training center for aviators in Allahabad without a clear vision of what role they were being trained for. He argued if aviation were brought under the Ministry of Defense, it would have more technical leadership. It would have more technical leadership than it was then lacking. He was right. Under communications, aviation was treated alongside matters with different priorities, such as postal communications. ठीक है. तो डिफेंस के अंदर ले आओ उसे. बेसिकली बात ये था, कम्युनिकेशंस के अंदर मत लाओ. The following year, the government passed the Indian Air Corporation Act, ending the debate. With the act, aviation was controlled by the central government, ending the aerial chaos caused by 11 private airlines. The airlines were nationalized. Airlines को nationalize कर लिया गया सारी की सारी, creating in their place the state's national domestic airlines, Indian Airlines and Air India International, to fly internationally. Records at the Directorate General of Civil Aviation (DGCA) in Delhi show that nationalizing aviation meant taking on the messy task of organizing the inherent fleet of 99 aircrafts, including 74 Dakotas, 12 Vikings, 3 Skymasters, and reshuffling personnel of more than 7,000 Indians of varying ranks and salaries. ये सब काम अब गवर्नमेंट कर रही थी. The tasks included shaping new air routes, closing and opening airports, and framing new guidelines. And yet there was an oblique reminder of the rich aviation inheritance from the Indian princess. The mascot of Air India was the smiling and obsequious Raja. Interesting. Oblique reminder, and yet the oblique reminder of rich aviation inheritance. Indian princess ने aviation शुरू किया. To soothe the disgruntled J.R.D. Tata, an aviation pioneer who owned one of the 11 private airlines, Nehru appointed him as the chairperson of Air India. Under Tata's leadership, the luxury of flying on Air India was reinforced. He demonstrated in the lush interiors, the cocktail bars, and the earliest idea of in-flight entertainment. Air India's Maharaja lounges and the Emperor fleet of Boeing 747s, branded as your palace in the sky, but distinguished by the ashtrays designed by artist Salvador Dali. Wow. By minute attention to detail over the temperature of the bacon and eggs served for breakfast by Indian flight attendants draped in saris and lehengas, unmindful of the inconvenience. The price of flying rose parallelly. In staunch contrast to Nehru's other attempts at democratizing services, his decision served to complicate the growth of airlines and cloister its benefits in the hands of a narrow elite. Wow. I don't know why he did what he did. Even if exorbitant costs, like huge costs, were ignored, Indian nationals at the time of independence had no legal right to fly abroad. Indian nationals at the time of independence had no legal right to fly abroad. It would take another decade before the passport, a document invented in the late 19th century, would travel from being a luxury of a few to the right of the many. To fly abroad meant first applying for a passport, which meant being at the mercy of the discretion of a passport officer. Starting from 1950, however, petitioners demanded an end to this arbitrariness in the issuance of passports. A foreign trip was an exalted affair, not only for the terrific costs involved, but because of the arbitrary power governments exercised over the issuance of passports. किसको देंगे किसको नहीं देंगे, arbitrary है, कोई system नहीं है, कोई method नहीं है. In the first decade of independence, this obscurity was frustrating. Several people from students who wanted to study in the United States to those who found better jobs in Germany found their plans crushed by a fickle flick of a pen. Several petitioned in court. Under the Constitution of India, the only reference to the movement under Article 19, which enshrines the right to freedom of expression, its subsection D grants the freedom to move freely throughout the territory of India. Since the writing of the Constitution was deeply influenced by the events of partition, which centered questions around territories, movement, and migration, this is a carefully thought out provision. The centrality of the partition is visible in Article 6, which allows migrants from Pakistan to return through any means, air, rail, sea, or on foot. In the long partition and the making of modern South Asia, the historian Wazira Zamindar narrates how air travel was a means of transport during the partition, but was accessible only to a few. Many were such that they could not afford, of course they could not. They still can't. How many? Less than 10% of India flies in the air. Many were such that they could not afford airfare, and after the announcement, there was not even enough time to come by rail. She notes, and those who could afford the plane could not come because they couldn't book the seat in time. Much of the legal confusion around passports in India stems from the initial confusion of a legal framework that had to manage the mass migration during partition. Interesting, but someone else, an expert, could throw more light on this, The confusion and often disregard with which the Indian government approached the issuance of passports are illustrated best with an exchange in Parliament in 1952. Sarangadhar Das, a socialist politician, demanded information on the case of an individual who received his passport after an enormous delay 2 months after he was supposed to fly abroad. Nehru, in his capacity as the Minister of External Affairs, tersely said he should congratulate himself that he got it at all. Nehru added, I am really surprised at this question. Am I supposed to go into individual cases of individual conduct or misconduct into the life history of every individual? I ask if any government so far has been so generous in issuing passports than this government, barring none in the world. To Nehru's government, it still remained a matter of generosity, not as we now see it. उसके दिमाग में था कि ये generosity है, ये कोई right नहीं है, या मैं एहसान कर रहा हूँ तुम पे, तुम्हें fly करने देने से. A few years later, though, the United States clearly established passports as a right. In the 1958 case, Kent versus Dulles, the court denied the unbridled discretion of the Secretary of State to withdraw a passport from a citizen for any substantive reason. In a case involving an American citizen with communist sympathies, the court held that the right to travel is a part of the liberty of which citizen cannot be deprived. At the time, India had no clear legislation on the regulation of passports. Independent India drew upon Passport Act of 1920, a brief colonial era piece of legislation which merely stated that passports will be issued by the central government to frame the passport rules of 1950. Both the act and the rules derived from it dealt primarily with entry into the country, not of the right to exit. Despite this, legal records show that many people are still entering India without passport, a discovery made in courts a few years from the issue of the rules. लोग आ रहे थे यहाँ पे वो rule के despite. Many of those entering were citizens of India who had left during partition and were still trying to figure out their lives. Abdul Rahim Ismail Rahimtullah, an Indian citizen, left for Karachi in 1954 and entered India the next year without a passport. Once arrested, he argued in the Bombay High Court that the Passport Act itself was ultra vires to the Constitution and did not apply to Indians. He also argued that following the freedom of movement guaranteed under Article 19, the courts could not in fact remove him from the country. The court, though, was unconvinced and pointed out that the word persons in the Passport Act included Indians. Rahimtullah submitted a petition that this was a constitutional matter and appealed for it to be heard by the Supreme Court. The court declined to entertain this and his conviction was upheld, and for that moment, the freedom of movement as the fundamental right was deferred. The knocks on the Supreme Court's doors from angry passport applicants, though, were becoming louder. In 1965, Francis Manjuran, a young graduate in medicine, was all set to leave for the United States to study medicine. He discovered, though, that his passport was rejected. This was the first case where the courts extensively explored the link between a passport as a legal right and the right to freedom of locomotion. The Kerala High Court observed that there is no statute governing the issue of passport or refusal thereof. In the light of all that is stated above, I think it should be held that the right of right to travel, except to the extent provided in Article 19(1)(d) of the Constitution, is within the ambit of the expression personal liberty as used in Article 21 of the Constitution, and that as a passport is essential for the enjoyment of that right. The denial of a passport amounts to a deprivation of that right, it noted. It is true that Article 21 permits a deprivation by procedure established by law. The hurdle in the path of the Union of India is the absence of any such procedure. ठीक है, basically passport के procedures बन रहे हैं क्योंकि ad hoc तरीके से लोगों के passport accept हो रहे हैं या refuse. फिर the article goes on to talk about yeah. In defense, the government of India argued that by virtue of being a doctor, Manjuran was unworthy of a passport. Manjuran was unworthy of a. Oh, okay. There are two people watching. There's somebody who's watching who's not commenting at all. I wish you would comment, bro, or whoever you are. But anyway, again, it keeps talking about the different acts that were passed. This particular article, right? And right, then it goes on to like the politics, but the idea was that eventually right, flying became more and more accessible, and now getting a passport is still difficult but not that difficult. And yeah, air travel has become much more accessible to a lot of people who travel for a lot of time. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this live. I'm not going into the details of this article because it's not super relevant to what we are doing. Thank you so much for joining in. If you reached till here, please subscribe to the channel. Write to me in the comments because that will support me, that will motivate me, that will inspire me to continue doing this for you guys and for myself. So thank you for listening to or watching 3 News Daily. I'm your host Varun, and this is a sign off. Bye bye.